Welcome to the Young at Heart quiz series. This is the 1950s General Knowledge Quiz brought to you by Young at Heart ULO. Whether you're playing along on your own, with family, or as part of a group, we hope this brings back some good memories and raises a smile or two along the way. There's no pressure here, no right or wrong way to take part. Just settle in and enjoy the journey back to one of Britain's most fascinating decades. Here's how it works. There are 2 rounds of 10 questions each, 20 questions in total. Bonus point if you got that one. Each question will appear on screen and I'll read it out loud for you. Then you'll have around 10 seconds of thinking time, and when the timer runs out, the answer will be revealed. After each answer, there's a fun fact and a little time to reflect. If you're watching with others, feel free to pause the video and have a chat. If you're on your own, just enjoy the moment before we move on. Right, let's get started. Round 1, the warm-up. These first 10 questions cover music, television, and everyday life in the 1950s. Nice and gentle to get us going. Question 1. Which young American singer became famous in the 1950s and was often called the king of rock and roll? The answer is Elvis Presley. Well done if you got that one. Elvis first appeared on British television in 1956. Some people thought rock and roll was far too wild for British tastes, but the records flew off the shelves regardless. Can anyone share a memory of hearing Elvis for the first time? Or what the reaction was like when rock and roll arrived in Britain? Next question. Question 2. In 1953, millions of British families watched a very special event on television for the first time. What was that special event? The answer is the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Television set sales doubled in the weeks before the coronation. Many families bought their very first television just so they could watch it, and those who didn't often gathered at a neighbour's house. Has anyone got a story from that day? Where were you when the coronation was on? Question 3. What was finally brought to an end in Britain in 1954 after more than 14 years? The answer is food rationing. Rationing had been in place since the Second World War. Sweets rationing had ended the year before, in 1953, to enormous excitement, especially for children. What do you remember about rationing? And what was the first thing you treated yourself to when it was finally over? Question 4. Which children's puppet programme, featuring a bear in blue and white striped pyjamas, first appeared on BBC television in 1950? The answer is Andy Pandy. Andy Pandy was one of the very first BBC programmes made specifically for young children. Many adults still remember the theme tune today and find themselves humming it without quite knowing why. Did anyone watch Andy Pandy, either as a child yourself or with your own children? Question 5. Roger Bannister made history in sport in 1954. What did he achieve? The answer? He became the first person ever to run a mile in under 4 minutes. What makes this even more remarkable is that Roger Bannister was a medical student at the time. He set the record and then went straight back to the hospital to see his patients that same afternoon. Does anyone remember hearing this news? It caused quite a stir at the time because many people thought it was physically impossible. Question 6. What new television channel launched in Britain in 1955, giving the BBC its first real competition? The answer is ITV, Independent Television. And the very first advert ever broadcast on ITV was for Gibbs SR toothpaste, which was aired on the 22nd of September 1955. What do you think of commercial television? Are you for it or against it? Question 7. Which famous American actress married Prince Rainier of Monaco in 1956, leaving Hollywood behind forever? The answer is Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly was just 26 years old when she retired from acting. She had already won an Oscar and starred in 3 Alfred Hitchcock films, quite a legacy to leave behind. Did anyone follow the story of the wedding? It was one of the most talked about events of the decade. Question 8. What did the Soviet Union launch into space in October 1957 for the first time in history? The answer is Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. Sputnik was roughly the size of a beach ball. It beeped as it orbited the Earth, and people across the world could pick up its signal on an ordinary radio. The space age really had begun. Can you recall conversations and news about Sputnik? It must have felt really extraordinary at the time, knowing something made by human hands was up there, circling above us, something we might take for granted today. Question 9. Which British comic, home to the mischievous Dennis the Menace, first appeared in 1951 and is still published today? The answer is the Beano. Dennis the Menace appeared on the cover of the very first issue and has barely changed in appearance since. The Beano has now been running for well over 70 years. Did anyone read the Beano as a child? Or perhaps bought it for their own children or grandchildren? Question 10, the last of round 1. What was the name of the popular dance craze that had teenagers jiving in dance halls and living rooms across Britain in the 1950s? The answer is the jive, also known as rock and roll dancing. The jive was considered quite shocking by older generations at the time, but it became one of the most enduring dance styles of the 20th century, and it's still danced today. Did anyone jive back in the day? Where did you go dancing in the 1950s? That's the end of round 1. Well done. Round 2 is called Think a Little Harder. The questions are slightly more specific, but they're still rooted in things you'll know. A couple of true or false, a fill the gap, and a few more things to think about. Take your time and keep going. Question 11. Hillary and Tenzing became the first people to reach the summit of the world's highest mountain in 1953. What is the mountain called? The answer is Mount Everest. And here's what makes this moment even more remarkable. The news reached Britain on the morning of the Coronation, the 2nd of June, 1953. The country had 2 extraordinary reasons to celebrate on the very same day. Can anyone recall both pieces of news arriving together? What a day that must have been. Question 12. What was the name of the first section of motorway to open in Britain in 1958? The answer is the Preston Bypass, now part of the M6. When the M1 opened the following year, there was no speed limit and no central barrier. Drivers were positively encouraged to enjoy the open road. Has anyone driven on early motorways? And what was that like compared to the roads today? Question 13. Which British singer had his first hit with Move It in 1958? A record often called Britain's first true rock and roll song. The answer is Cliff Richard. Cliff Richard has had UK chart hits in every single decade from the 1950s right through to the 2010s. That's a record no other British artist has ever matched. Is anyone a Cliff Richard fan? Has anyone seen him perform? Question 14. This is our first true or false. The first Eurovision Song Contest was held in the 1950s. True or false? The answer is true. The very first Eurovision was held in 1956 in Lugano, Switzerland. Only 7 countries took part. Switzerland won and also hosted. At that time, there was no televised public vote. A jury decided the winner. Does anyone watch the Eurovision? How do you think it's changed? Question 15. This one is the fill the gap question. In 1957, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan told the British public they had never had it so something. Can you fill the missing word? The missing word was good. Britain had never had it so good. Interestingly, Macmillan was actually warning about the dangers of inflation when he said it, but the phrase was seized upon as a symbol of 1950s prosperity, and it has stayed in the language ever since. Did life actually feel more prosperous in the late 1950s? Had much changed since the war years? Question 16. What popular toy, a large plastic hoop you spin around your waist, became a craze in 1958? The answer is the hula hoop. 25 million hula hoops were sold in just 4 months after the toy launched in America. It remains one of the fastest selling toys ever made. Did anyone have a hula hoop? And more importantly, could you still do it now? Question 17. Which legendary American rock and roll singer and songwriter died in a plane crash in February 1959, aged just 22? The answer is Buddy Holly. The 3rd of February 1959 became known as the day the music died, a phrase later immortalised in Don McLean's song American Pie. Buddy Holly left behind an extraordinary legacy in just a few short years. Does anyone have a favourite Buddy Holly song? Feel free to share a line or two if you know one. Question 18. Another true or false? Commercial television launched in Britain before the BBC began broadcasting in colour. True or false? The answer is true. ITV launched in 1955. BBC colour broadcasting didn't begin until 1967, over a decade later. The BBC began its colour service on BBC Two with coverage of the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. When did your family get a colour television? Do you remember watching something in colour for the very first time? Question 19. What was the name of the style adopted by young men in the 1950s, known for a distinctive quiff hairstyle, long drape jacket, and drainpipe trousers? The answer is Teddy Boy, or Ted for short. The name came from the Edwardian fashion the style was inspired by, Teddy being a traditional nickname for Edward. Did anyone know a Teddy Boy, or perhaps you were one yourself? What do you think of the look at the time? And now, question 20, the very last one. In which year did the 1950s begin? The answer, of course, is 1950. The same year also saw the launch of the very first credit card in America and the first World Cup broadcast on BBC Radio. Before we move on to the scores, has anyone got a favourite memory from the 1950s that can be shared? Something that took you back or something that made you smile? And that's it. 20 questions done. Thank you so much for playing the Young at Heart 1950s general knowledge quiz. We hope something in there brought back a good memory, or at least raised a smile. Now, how did you do? Coming up are the score slides. Find the one that matches your score and see what the 1950s has to say about it. If you enjoyed this quiz, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We'd also love to hear your memories in the comments. Did any of the questions take you back? Share a story from the 1950s below. And if you're a carer or work in a care setting, all our quizzes are free to access and share. Whenever you're ready, there's another decade waiting. Each quiz in the Young at Heart series has something different to enjoy, so why not try another decade next time? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.